Good morning and welcome to our post-budget discussion. Today we'll be discussing and debating the main incentives, the main measures that were introduced by our Minister during last Monday's budget speech. Today we'll try to shed some light, discuss and debate some of the key measures and try as much as possible to give a different perspective. I am joined here by some of my colleagues, by Charles Vella, who is our senior VAT consultant, who's also the ex-commissioner for VAT, our advisory partner, Chris Bartolo, and our direct tax leader, Markita Falzon. Budgets are always eagerly anticipated in Malta, and this one, I would say, more than usual, especially by those in our profession, purely because we were expecting to see some major changes to our tax legislation. Mark, first question I think for today is addressed to you. What happened from a tax perspective? Did we see any major changes or not?
Really and truly, no, Mark. We haven't seen any drastic changes from a tax point of view. We have been anticipating a tax reform for a couple of months now, if not even years. Possibly, I can understand why this tax reform wasn't announced by the Minister of Finance, and this is linked to the approach which is going to be adopted with respect to Pillar 2. What is Pillar 2? In a nutshell, Pillar 2 is the minimum tax applicable for multinational enterprises who have consolidated group revenues of more than 750 million, whereby these entities in the respective jurisdictions in which they operate will be taxed at a minimum tax of 15%. Why is this linked to our Maltese tax system? As you might all be aware that in Malta, international companies are subject to tax at the effective rate of 5%. Through this Pillar 2, this 5% regime for companies which are within scope of the directive will obviously have to top up the tax to pay the minimum tax of 15%. This is done through complex calculations and obviously this will have an impact on our tax systems. Malta, in line with the regulations relating to Pillar 2, will be adopting this what is called the delayed approach, where entities within the European Union which do not have a substantial amount of ultimate parent entities of these multinational groups resident in Malta may delay the introduction of Pillar 2 by 6 years. So we have really and truly up to 2029 to actually implement these rules. But what we can miss here is that through the delayed approach, Malta is forfeiting the right to actually collect this top-up tax, with possibly other jurisdictions within the European Union actually claiming this top-up tax, which is forfeited, so to speak, by Malta. Pillar 2 will come, and we'll have to see how this will affect us. We have around 660. Just under 700 companies forming part of multinational groups, and the effect will be there. So we have to see how our current tax system, our current ways of doing things, the 5% effective tax rate, how we're going to go about the introduction of Pillar 2. How will we retain the competitive edge we have? How will we educate our clients that we are moving away from the 5% tax regime and going into the 15% regime as all other EU member states. So the tax reform was, so to speak, expected to act as a, how to say it, it helps us prepare ourselves to reduce the impact of Pillar 2 on our tax system. What we're seeing also that Malta will try to introduce tax incentives and tax grants which will ultimately be set off against the 15% tax, which will possibly help companies in Malta retain this competitiveness when compared to other jurisdictions. So basically, that's why this anticipation for the tax reform. But so to speak, we have certainty as to the implementation, that we will not implement ATA2 in 2024, but we are left with uncertainty as to when this will be implemented, how we are going to tackle this impact on our financial services industry, and what we're doing to sort of try to find other solutions to keep attracting foreign investors to Malta to actually set up a shop here in Malta.
Okay, so I think we have some certainty, if you like, over the next 12 months. We know that nothing is going to obviously be introduced, at least within the next 12 months. However, probably this time next year, there's going to be even more anticipation to see whether we will continue throughout the whole 6 years or
Exactly.
or
We have
not.
to
So,
adopt this wait and see approach, see what other member states are doing, possibly try to take the best that they are doing and introduce this within our tax system.
okay, very interesting. So, okay, Charles, if I had to rope you in, I know over the past couple of days we spoke about, we analyzed some pre-budget publications. Now that the budget has passed, overall, Charles, was the budget in line with your expectations or not?
Yes, let me start with a general comment, Mark. At a glance, the 2024 budget announced yesterday by the Minister of Finance appears to be satisfactory. In any case, it has the scope of continuity, rather keeping the same navigation course undertaken by government in these last years in terms of economic performance, social justice, health, education, the environment, energy, etc., etc. It is focused mainly on the social aspect. In fact, as the title implies, Malta Justa, it seems to emphasize the content that the wealth is being distributed to those mostly in need. That's good. However, in my view, and referring to your question, because we have discussed a lot the pre-budget recommendations made by official bodies, first and foremost the one by the Chamber of Commerce, in which there's a whole lot of suggested measures. Some of them were taken up, but in a minimum way, not in the ways that we expected. For example, in my view, this budget, there were very few new schemes. There was nothing new. In other words, I should say that what was there last year continued in this budget. So there's, I think, about, I'm inventing the measures, but from a glance, I can see that about, I think, 80% of the measures were in continuation
Extensions
from the
of
last
previous
extensions.
rather than introduction of new measures.
Of course, there were a few new schemes and measures, but these represent when compared. Now, as you mentioned, my field of expertise is VAT. In reality, there was nothing VAT in this budget. I wouldn't say nothing because the minister made reference to the legal notice published about a fortnight ago regarding the introduction of a new reduced rate of 12% that will come into effect as from 1st January. This is mainly regards 4 particular services. It is going to be applied to 4 particular services, which are custody and management of securities, management of credit, and credit guarantees by persons other than the one who granted the credit, hiring of short-term pleasure boats. This is attractive, and certain care of the human body services. Apart from my activity, because in this podcast, the other issues are being to be treated as already done by Markita, by my able colleagues here. So here I am in the vest, I'm wearing the hats of an experienced VAT expert, but also a pensioner. So I think with your permission, you would allow me to make some points on this budget about pensioners. So the budget continues on the previous year trend of strongly sustaining pensioners. In fact, the COLA increase was extended to 15 euros per week, and the increased untaxed portion of income tax turnover was up to 20%. What are the benefits here? While the COLA increase would target the obvious cost of living being burdened by everyone, but especially by pensioners, the income savings would encourage more pensioners to continue in employment, benefiting society in terms of experience, whilst keeping them socially and mentally engaged, conducive to a healthier and hopefully longer living, translating into lesser costs for government and hospital care, hopefully. For example, I can tell from my experience, when I retired from public service 9 years ago, I joined Zampa de Battista. 9 years have passed in a jiffy, but I can say that the first years, from an income point of view, they were really a bit hard. In fact, I was thinking, is it worth it? Because I had to pay until 65 years the Social Security contributions with nothing in return. And except for the 10,000 euros concession at 15% on the income, my income, the pension plus the employment, was taxed at really high. By today's standards, this is very good, especially the upping up of the untaxed portion of income tax is very encouraging.
So now 60% of your income is not tax effective, right, for pensions?
I don't think from the income. I think it's from the pension. I don't. Well, I have to check it when I see if just now in October my income tax bill.
If I may, yes, it is 60% of the working income
Working income.
derived over and above your pension
Okay.
will be tax-free.
Okay. Thank you.
Good
Mark.
news.
Yes. Yes, also as an ancian, I'm using the Maltese word, not elderly, because it is close to my heart. I care a lot about the environment. I look at the state of the environment, or rather its gradual degradation, with a heavy heart. Every ancian hopes to leave the world a better place. Remember Michael Jackson? To live? For his offspring and possibly their offspring to live in. I ask, is this the case in Malta? Has the 2004 budget addressed this pressing issue? I mean, there were a few schemes, encouraging schemes, but on the other hand, in my view, there was no hands-on action now, measures to leave the world in a better place. I give you a quick example so that you'll pass to my colleagues. For example, it is good to sustain the switch from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles. It's encouraging. It's encouraging also, although I'm against them, for the purchase of e-scooters. But on the other hand, you would come of your house, and in front of you, you will see a cherry picker with the engine switched on. Cherry picker brought from the UK 20 years ago, fuming diesel fumes, 48 hours a day. Nothing has been addressed there. And the construction industry. We speak of cars in the street, but I think a good chunk of the carbon emissions in Malta come from the construction industry. Cranes, they work all day. I mean, a car, you go to work and park it. For example, a crane, I don't know whether a crane looks with diesel, or an excavator, it works with fuel a whole day.
Yeah.
Nothing has been done there. I think the solution would be, everybody has been saying it, but alas, there is no even a comma mentioned in the budget about a sustainable, robust transport system, public transport system. And here I'm speaking, the only solution would be having an overground or underground light train solution.
Okay, I think, thanks, Charles, for that. I think that even if we have to take a bit of a step back and try to see, okay, the positive aspects of the budget as well. I think it was quite clear from the onset that the budget is going to be a social budget. Even the name in itself, Malta Ġusta, Fair Malta, gave us that kind of insight from before we started. And there were some positive social measures. On the top of my head, feel free obviously to jump in. On the top of my head, I know that there was the COLA has increased up to 12.81 per week. Minimum wage has also increased. The children's allowance has increased by €250 per child, which is a substantial increase as well. And there were also some additional social measures, including what yeah, exactly. Including what Charles mentioned as well for pensioners. So I think from a social side, the budget did actually, help at least certain vulnerable families as well from that point of view. Chris, if we have to rope you into the conversation as well, as an old budget, the minister gave us a bit of an overview of Malta's performance over the last 12 months, and also an indication of the forecast of where we expect to be this time next year. Can you summarize it a bit for our viewers, what was said?
Okay, thank you, Mark. So, first of all, I couldn't agree more with Charles that sort of economic growth is not just in terms of GDP, but we also have to look at the big picture and look at the infrastructure, look at the overpopulation, and address these issues which were not top of the priority in this budget. But before, and maybe we'll come to these later on, I'll just mention some figures as you highlighted. Before looking at sort of local national figures, let's look at the global economic growth performance, which also saw a downturn in the recent years. So post-COVID, we've seen high prices, so high inflation rates, which have been persistent. We've seen disruption in supply chains. There's the war between Russia and Ukraine. There's conflict in the Middle East. So there are a lot of things which have been happening, which have hindered the global economic growth rate. And in fact, in 2023, it's expected to go down to 3%, which is, if I recall correctly, minus 0.5% from the previous year. In Malta, the economic growth in 2023 is expected to sort of surpass the EU average and global economic growth rate. There has been a decrease in 22.
The rate?
The rate, it was over 6% in 22, but it's still a positive GDP growth, economic growth, which was even more than what was budgeted for 2023.
Which means a consistent overperformance when compared to the EU by Malta as well. So this has happened for a number of years now.
That's right. And in 2024, the government is expecting a similar economic growth rate. So we're looking at 4.2% forecast GDP growth in 2023. Looking at the government deficit as a percentage of GDP, there's positive results as well. This year, the deficit will be around 5% of the total GDP, and the forecast is for this to go down to 4.5%. So the minister presented the forecast till 2026, and there is the expectation that the deficit as a percentage of the GDP decreases by 0.5% every year, at least till 2026. So that is a positive outlook as well. One thing as well is regarding the inflation. So we've seen, and everyone is aware about the high inflation rate. Inflation rates are constant increases in prices. It's expected we've seen a decrease in inflation rate over the last couple of months, and in 2023 the inflation rate is expected to be around 5.7%, despite the subsidies on fuel and energy. So as a result of the persistent inflation rates, we've seen a high cost of living adjustment.
Yeah.
The mechanism in Malta for the cost of living adjustment is based on the retail price index. So they look at the change in prices over the last 12 months I believe it's from September to August, and that sort of gives you the COLA adjustment. From what we've heard so far, there aren't any intentions to change the COLA mechanism, so it's expected that the COLA will be relatively high in the coming years as well. In terms of the COLA increase, there has been sort of criticism that this may fuel.
So it was the same last year as well. I had discussed this as well last year.
Exactly, it's a cycle where the COLA at the end of the day it would result, and we've seen as well, probably we'll mention later on, the increase in the minimum wage as well. So we'll see in the coming months an increase in the wage bill for businesses, and that may result in higher prices. I mean, that is not the only factor which ties into the inflation rate, but yes, it may fuel inflation. Having said this, the projections for the inflation year for 2024 is expected to go down. It's 3.7%. The projected inflation for 2024. So goods and service charges are expected to find a more moderate level, so to speak.
Okay.
So in terms of economic growth and government deficit, it's a positive outlook. One of the major concerns is that this may be fueled by the subsidies in energy and fuel. It is clear from the budget, from the minister's speech on Monday, that the government's intention is to continue subsidizing the energy and fuel. It's estimated this will cost around 350 million next year. So this sort of dependence, this reliance on the subsidy is sort of fueling the
around 900 million over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
So that's not a joke.
That's not a joke.
And eventually this will be phased out. So
That's right. And in fact, the minister himself said that this cannot continue forever. And I think there was also the European Commission, which was asking sort of the government to address this. So yes, in next year the subsidy will continue as is in terms of offering the subsidy across the board. But yes, we do expect that there will be a plan to sort of start phasing out the subsidy.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
If I may, one comment on COLA is that there has been a number of proposals before the budget that the COLA should be exempt from tax.
Yeah.
Whilst I do believe that the intention is I understand the intention, but what could be done in my view is that you tax only a certain level of you will exempt the lower income earners from actually taxing the COLA, because this will have obviously a ripple effect and could have a negative impact rather than a positive one. Even so, with respect to the minimum wage, I would alter the brackets so that the increase will not be adversely hit by
Or else it's
the
eaten up
increase.
immediately.
Exactly.
Also, as a further comment, Chris, I think there were also suggestions from constituted bodies like the motor employers and chamber regarding the model used for COLA. Because basically, and many would agree, if the inflation goes up, I don't know, by 5%, it would go out for everyone. There were suggestions, however, that the increase in COLA would further trigger inflation, and that obviously the employers would have a higher wage bill, which would translate in their prices going up. So this is a vicious circle, so to say. And they suggested a new model based on production. I don't know, obviously nothing has been done as a budget, but perhaps I think in future, with all these things happening, it could be that...
we might need to rethink the whole...
I mean, the budgets are always divisory. There are some who agree and some who don't agree. It ultimately depends on which side you're on. Which, for example, the employers don't like COLA, but the employees do.
Agreed. Chris, also, I think as advisory partner, you must have been quite interested to hear as well whether there were any new measures or benefits for businesses in general, for startups and in new industries, for example, which might have been also mentioned in the budget. But or we can summarize for our viewers what was said. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, last week I attended the interview held between the Times of Malta and the Minister, and it was made clear during that interview that the government has to sort of prioritize in order to focus on areas which need the most attention. And as we've seen in the budget, those areas have been the continuation, the subsidies of fuel and energy, and the addressing sort of the distribution to the most vulnerable in society, and we've seen a lot of social welfare incentives. So as a result of that, sort of the government had to prioritize, and it was made clear that there will be prioritization, and as a result, the spending in the subsidy for energy and fuel will come at a cost of sort of foregoing other investments. And in fact, we've seen not much in terms of other sectors such as education, healthcare, the infrastructure, etc. Even in terms of overpopulation and all the issues that it brings along with it in terms of overpopulation, such as waste management, we have the issue of traffic congestion, and these sort of have been are delayed again. Having said this, even in terms of new industries, it's been put forward to the government to sort of come up with new industries where the requirement would be for less labor-intensive industries to start addressing the overpopulation and issues that we're facing.
To reduce our need on human resources, effectively.
Exactly. So there has been some mention in the budget speech. I think at this stage there are more ideas other than something which are tangible, concrete. So hopefully in the coming months there would be a discussion so that these ideas or proposals would turn into something tangible, which would focus more on the quality of life, on the sustainability and all the measures which one was hoping for. In terms of ideas and in terms of new niches, some which were mentioned are, first of all, family businesses, which the government plans to continue investing in the regulatory framework of the Malta family businesses. There was the mention that the family charters are expected to be regulated, and there should be an increase. We should see an increase as well in the tax incentives in terms of tax credits for family businesses willing to internationalize, to innovate, or even to digitalize. In terms of the gaming industry, there was as well reference in this speech that the government will continue investing in this strategy, in the national strategy on esports, and the regulatory framework for the gaming sector. Something which was mentioned as well is that we're expecting some regulatory changes by the MFSA for notified PIFs, professional investor funds, and also limited partnerships. So that's something which is in the pipeline as well. There's the mention as well of a center of excellence in the field of semiconductors by Malta Enterprise, which would lead into sort of high value industry as well. Some changes were mentioned in the aviation and maritime sector. So there's the aim to implement a new aviation policy and additional investment, and there's changes to the Merchant Shipping Act as well, and a 20-year vision for the maritime industry. One thing which not in terms of new niches, but we're on the maritime sector, and something which was mentioned, which we haven't discussed so far, is that there was a reference in the budget that companies registered under the Merchant Shipping Act, not only, but also companies registered under the Companies Act, that would meet some specific thresholds. In the Companies Act, they're referred to as private exempt companies. where apparently there will be a change in the audit requirement for these companies in order to file their tax returns. It will be eased, but there's also a reference that we need to make sure that the integrity of the financial data being presented, which would feed into their tax return, would not be compromised. So I think we still need to see some developments on this,
Yeah,
but
and
that
this
is
will definitely impact many of our clients and many other accounting and audit firms out there as well. So it's quite a big one which needs to be looked into.
And they are introducing this to sort of try to increase the compliance rate of entities which need to file their tax returns in a timely manner. But we have to see the repercussions of it all, so to speak.
That's right. In terms of sectors, there was also reference to the allocation of some industrial land for manufacturing companies by in the coming months. And in a nutshell, that is it with respect to sort of new niches or new sectors that the government is planning to sort of invest in the coming year. Coming back to your question with respect to EU funds. Yes, there will be, rather than from what has been mentioned so far, rather than new schemes, there will be extension of existing schemes, and this is sort of similar to a lot of measures in the budget, as Charles mentioned. It's more of a continuation rather than coming up with something new which will change things drastically. So yes, in terms of EU funding, there was reference in the budget speech that there is around 40 million under the business enhanced schemes and around 16 million under the Invest EU schemes, which will lead to the reintroduction of a number of schemes. Just to mention a few. There was the seed investment for startups, so there's tax credits for qualifying investors investing in startups, which will be introduced. There's the rent subsidy, the smart and sustainable. So these are all schemes which were there in the past, which will be reintroduced next year for SMEs. One thing which was mentioned as well in the budget, which was actually introduced last month, if I recall correctly, is the Venture Capital Fund.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was launched during the first edition of the Tech Expo. And again, this is aimed at helping startups to set up operations by having equity investment of up to around 500,000. So yes, I mean, there was the reintroduction, the extension of a number of measures. One, in my opinion, one would have sort of hoped for new measures or new incentives to promote even the productivity and enhancing our SMEs. But yes, I mean, the extension of these measures are commendable and will help businesses especially to grow and digitalize.
Definitely. Thanks, Chris. Mar, I'm a bit conscious of time, so in the very beginning of our discussion today, we started immediately discussing the tax reform or lack of tax reform. I would imagine. I would say there were some other fiscal measures, fiscal incentives which were introduced in the budget. Not so many, if I recall correctly. I don't know if you can just highlight the main ones that were mentioned.
As Charles mentioned, there were several incentives that were extended rather than introduced. We're mentioning the first-time buyer schemes, the second-time buyer schemes. This will help, obviously, individuals buying property for the first time actually getting to buying the property, given to the increase in immovable property, the prices of immovable property in Malta. And the government, instead of putting a cap on the prices of properties, they are using this incentive, obviously, to help these individuals. Other incentives which were extended were properties which are reduced stamp duty rates for properties situated in the UCA and other grants relating to properties situated in properties which are vacant and have been so for 7 years. They are quite the same as previous years, just they were extended further. Another a very important extension relates to the donation of family businesses. This has been further extended by another year. We have seen this introduced year on year for, I believe, 4 or 5 years now. And through this, we are seeing a number of businesses which are actually focusing on and implementing the succession plan rather than waiting till the eventuality when they have no option, so to speak. And the benefit is substantial. So we're saying that duty is paid at 1.5% as opposed to the 5% if you are deemed as a property company. So we are seeing a substantial increase in actually the implementation of a succession plan. Another important measure, which I say this time it was lifted, is the reduced stamp duty rate for property situated in Gozo. Basically, this is aimed to reduce the property frenzy, the development of property in Gozo, because we've seen a substantial increase in developments in Gozo. So I think this is a step in the right direction. So
Okay.
in a nutshell, basically, we're seeing more of the same in terms of current incentives with respect to movable property and this removal, which will act as a...
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think as well from the, during the budget speech, there was a lot of importance given to sustainability and ESG. We're living in a world of ESG, so obviously that had to be given quite some importance. Nothing I would say extremely groundbreaking, but if I could just highlight just a few points that were mentioned, I think that possibly the most important one is that the government established a climate action authority, or is in the process of establishing actually a climate action authority with the intention to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. To be interesting to see what the strategy is over there. There's also a consultation which is being done to issue or provide fiscal incentives to encourage ESG investing, so investing in green bonds or in ESG compatible companies. This is something which has been done in the US and in other EU countries, and I think that Malta really requires this. So I think it's a good step in the right direction, I would say. There are the extensions of the current schemes, the energy saving home schemes, the PV panels, the heat pump, the water heaters, and so on. We're used to those as well. Interesting, there's, I think, which has seen a big influx of electric vehicles in the roads today. That is because of the current scheme for electric vehicles, the access to better financing and so on. That's going to be extended. So possibly we're going to see more electric vehicles in the next 12 months again. And we're going to see many more charging points. So currently there's about 370 charging points around Malta, and that's expected to increase up to 1,200. So 4 times as many, which will obviously have an impact on parking as well. So let's see how that works out. There are incentives, as Charles already mentioned, to buy e-scooters. There's also, I would say, the last point from here is the extension of the current ESG schemes for SMEs. So currently there are schemes in place to assist SMEs to start reporting, to start measuring their ESG output, and that's expected to continue to be extended into next year as well. I think those are the main sustainability related incentives as well, which are quite important. And that kind of brings me to the end, kind of started to close off a little bit our conversation. And I'm going to start off myself. So what I expected, at least, I'm going to pick on a subject which is sustainability and ESG. I think there were some good measures introduced or extended, I would say. However, I did expect more. I know for a fact that many businesses in Malta would like to do more, would like to invest more in making their businesses more sustainable. So quite frankly, I did expect to see some more schemes, some more incentives given to businesses to be able to employ consultants, to employ engineers, architects, and so on, to better their infrastructure, to better their projects. And as far as I'm aware, not much was included here. So that is the first major, let's not say criticism, but something which I hoped to see. So maybe we can close off the last 10 minutes of today's session, of today's discussion, by possibly highlighting one, or if you have more, obviously you can say more. I'm not going to stop you. Possible measures or incentives which you hoped to see in the budget, but unfortunately were not there. I don't know who wants to start off.
No, I mean from my end, as part of my concluding remarks, sort of my view on this was that the government has sort of targets in terms of financial targets to reach next year in terms of the national debt as a percentage of GDP. In fact, it was made clear that even though it's expected that the debt is expected to increase in the coming years, the government is committed to see that this does not exceed 60% of the GDP, and looks at economic growth more in terms of GDP growth. So there's targets there, but the government took the decision to continue subsidizing the energy and fuel. So there's a huge investment, huge cost there. So in order to reach those targets, prioritization had to be done. So that is quite clear.
And we were warned about that. I think you mentioned it before.
Exactly, and we were warned about that. So I think looking now at the budget, I think it's a budget with a heart, because we've seen a lot of social welfare incentives, but also it ensures sort of continuity for the government to reach its targets. But I think now what we need to see in the coming years is more of a long-term strategy to address issues other than GDP growth. So we've mentioned today, I think all of us mentioned today, issues like sustainability, like overpopulation, like waste management, so infrastructural issues. So I think this is what hopefully we'll see in the coming years, is more of a long-term strategy to make sure that the economic growth is sustainable, and that the sort of quality of life is not compromised.
Is improved, I would say.
Is improved as a result of the budget.
Okay. Marquita, Charles, I don't know who wants to.
Yes,
Ladies first.
from my end, I do believe that it was a budget of prioritization aimed at the most vulnerable, and the priority at this point is the EU subsidies and giving out grants and social measures to help the most in need. From a tax perspective, I would like to point out there were no new taxes introduced during this budget. Having said this, the government depends heavily on tax collection, so most of the government income is derived from taxes, and here we see that no new taxes have been introduced. As I mentioned in the beginning, what I look forward to is possibly more clarity and with respect to the tax reform, how this will be implemented to cater for the introduction of Pillar 2. So we'll wait and see what other jurisdictions will be doing, and possibly what will be implemented in our legislation.
Okay. Charles, you already mentioned a little bit about transport before.
No, not transport again. So I'm not going to repeat what my able colleagues here, Chris and Marquita, have already said about the targets for this budget, which were mainly to address the areas that need most, like the social aspect. I think, in my view, rather than what it contained, I would like to comment what it lacked. In my view, it lacked vision. The government did not have courage to be visionary. And what do we mean by visionary? Looking forward, where are we now? Where would we be in 10, 20 years' time? For example, there was no reference to artificial intelligence. And new technologies.
Yeah.
Everybody scared stiff hearing on general AI. Would it take over humans or not? I mean, this appears to be fiction now, but in future it become a reality. Another, I think, aspect that I think it lacks, the overpopulation we have of cheap labor and jobs has created a situation of brain drain. The smart guys are not staying in Malta, they are going to find employment elsewhere. Is anything being done to harness this hemorrhage? Because I don't think Malta affords to lose brains
Yeah.
for the future.
Okay. I think that brings us to an end of our post-budget discussion. You can find the full list of measures on our website. We have a dedicated page to this budget, which will also include, I would imagine, a link to our podcast for those of you who would like to join later on. I hope you found it insightful. I hope you found the possible angles or different perspectives that we raised helpful as well. Thank you very much for joining.